13th Sonata, and that's in E-flat major. It's Opus 27. Its companion work is Opus 27 number 2, one of the most famous pieces of music in the world, certainly the first movement, and it's the Moonlight. Now, Beethoven himself knew that he is now into a new direction, and on the title of the work he says these are two sonatas quasi una fantasia. Sonatas somewhat like fantasies. And perhaps in these two sonatas, Beethoven was aiming at some new inward fusion with the progressive continuity that the sonata form can give. But I think the boundaries of movements were so divisional, and he's becoming so much the tone poet as well as the great architectural wonder that he is. Let's open with Arthur Schnabel in the first movement, marked Andante, of the E-flat Sonata, not at all known compared to the Moonlight, and it's just a wonderful work. First movement of the sonata Quasi una Fantasia.
It's a very strange structure. In the middle of it, I thought we had gone into the second sonata, that I had goofed somehow. The record happens not to be banded properly or easily for me. And he goes into this very fast middle section, which is totally unrelated.
Well, there's the fantasy aspect.
And then he goes back to the same theme again.
Yes, and it's also an andante, and it's not well worked out as a sonata form. In other words, it's really a long lyrical piece.
What period of his life was that? And
well, these sonatas, both probably composed in 1801. So around the same time as Opus 26 and Opus 22.
Which is a minor masterpiece, the Opus 26, I've decided.
Isn't that wonderful? Well, Schnabel is a great artist, and I have here a little tidbit. He writes from his own book, which he calls My Life in Music. Anyway, when I played the 32 Beethoven sonatas in London, Schnabel wrote, there was a very old gentleman, a great music lover and amateur. He had heard me play once before, and he bought 6 or 7 tickets, all subscription tickets for the whole series. Before the concerts, he invited his friends, played and explained the sonatas to them, then he came with them to my concerts. And from concert to concert, he became more and more disappointed and disillusioned about my playing. He was near despair, so after the 5th concert, he wrote a 14-page letter to me, a moving letter, really, in which he said that if he had known how I played the sonatas, he would certainly not have bought these tickets. He practically asked me to return the money to him. Then he went on, singling out certain places, writing, for instance, "Why did you hurry in this measure, a man with your technique?" And then he went on blaming me for many other details which were not according to his expectations, until he reached the conclusion, "If you go on like this, you should stop playing Beethoven altogether." So I sat down and answered the old man. There was not a trace of irony in my letter. I assured him, for example, that he overrated my technical abilities. If I hurried, it was simply a defect of my technique. I did not want to hurry, regretted it just as much as he regretted it. But then I also wrote in the course of this letter that to buy a ticket is no insurance of happiness. The performer only promises to try his best, but he cannot promise to please the listener. Now that's a charming story from the great Arthur Schnabel, who just played for us the first movement of the E-flat Sonata, Opus 27, number 1. And now let's hear that movement in the hands of Maria Grinberg. Oh, that was a very beautiful performance of the opening movement of the sonata in E-flat.
It's sort of strange, although it isn't really, that we, as the program series goes on, we find ourselves gravitating towards certain collections of the Beethoven sonatas. I noticed that we make rather heavy use of the Brendel, for example, also the Grinberg and the Schnabel, and slightly less use, for example, of the Barenboim. The Kempf gets played quite frequently, and I think, if anything, we're starting to develop a pattern in terms of the way we think they should go.
And I'm liking very much Grinberg.
Grinberg very much.
Of course, as we get into the later sonatas, and I hesitate to say greater sonatas, but in many ways they are, we have many more performances because individual artists have concentrated on certain of these works. Petri and the Hammerklavier, and we have performances by Ernst Levy and Solomon. Many others are coming up. Yeah. I'd like to get back to Schnabel, though, because this book is really wonderful. It's called My Life and Music. It's the St. Martin's Press. It's $3.50. It's paperback. I like the design of the book because it's all white and black printing and just one stripe of red. Now, I don't know why I had to say that, but I mean, visually, it's a wonderful paperback. Anyway, Schnabel writes, my debut at Carnegie Hall was on Christmas Day, 1921. Now, he's not yet really known. By the 30s, he's a living god. There was a blizzard blowing. And I don't say it was a great success. The press was not bad, though, but some people immediately tried to initiate me in the tricks of changing from the type of musician I consider myself to be into some popular type. I remember that the manager of my piano company said to me, now listen, Mr. Schnabel, you have to be sensible when you come here to America, or anywhere. Let me say you have 10 qualities. It would be sufficient if you used only 5 of those. Then we'll make a lot of money. But you're too serious a musician. And then we'll store the other 5 qualities, and when you come again, you can take out those other 5 qualities and again use 10. I took these things very seriously at the time and replied, you are mistaken. If I really have 10 qualities, as you described them to me, I am attracted only by tasks requiring 15 qualities. But the manager looked blank. Then I remember an editorial in the Musical Courier, which I used to read then, but have not since. This editorial was called Salesmanship. It said, now here's a very good artist and musician, Mr. Schnabel. Why is he not sensible? Why does he insist upon playing this repertoire? Mozart, Schubert, Beethoven. He could make plenty of money if only he had a little more flexibility and elasticity. He came here to sell his wares, and if he wants to sell his wares, he must also take into account the demands on the market. I knew who the writer was, Schnabel says. We had a friend in common. I think the man was absolutely right. So I asked my friend to tell the writer of this editorial that I agreed with him. He is only erring in one respect. It is true that I came here to sell my wares, but he confuses me with a warehouse. In the words of Schnabel, certainly.
He's a charming writer, isn't he?
He was a man that was very magnetic. There are certain of his students that after, not because he was a terrible type of person, but the whole of a room would be filled with his presence, and their whole minds would be so permeated with Schnabel, that sometimes they just had to get away and rest from his extraordinary energy. Well, do we have another performance now of...
Yes, as a matter of fact, Brendel is ready.
Brendel is ready, and oh yes, he plays this very well. The E-flat Sonata. Lovely performance of the E-flat Sonata, Beethoven's 13th sonata of the 32, and that was Alfred Brendel.
How about some more Schnabel stories? If you want, I'll put the Schnabel record on again to induce you.
Oh, here's something good. When he was a youngster, he writes, I was attracted to people above my age. Now at 63, I turn to the youngsters. Unfortunately, they are, nowadays, not too keen on joining with older people. I remember the time when young people still wanted to be with older ones. Maybe it is this attitude, this change of attitude that has driven older people to their frantic efforts to appear much younger than they are. I have here a small list, very incomplete, of things which did not exist or were just introduced when I was a boy. This list seems to me very impressive in spite of its incompleteness. Electricity, very rare. Telephone, very rare. Lifts, elevators, hardly. Gas, even gas was very rare. Refrigerators, not divined. Immovable bathtubs, practically unknown. Central heating, none. Vacuum cleaners, none. Safety razors, none. Aluminum, none. Canned foods, only homed canned in glasses, no tins except for sardines. Factory-made bread, just coming. X-rays, none. Ready-made clothes, none. Artificial silk, none. Paper napkins, none. Cars, none. Gramophones, none. Radios, none. Typewriters, none. Underground subways, none. Department stores, just beginning. No films, no skyscrapers, no pictures in the press, no airplanes, no submarines, no athletics to the extent that they are known now, no payments by check, etc. Even some of the diseases didn't exist or had different names then. I remember when influenza appeared for the first time. It was very exciting and shockingly severe. Technology and science were not yet as popular and worshipped as they are now. They were not yet the topic of most conversations. Great men in these fields were active, but only a few of the public knew about and discussed these matters. Unknown were psychoanalysis, the theory of relativity, atom splitting, and so on. All that might have been in the air already, and perhaps contributing to the Viennese defeatism, which I have mentioned several times. If you were to ask me whether I think that human society, without all these commodities and services, progress and discoveries, was happier at that time than it is now, I would not know the answer. It may well be. I submit that the more one is inclined or seduced to possess, conserve, and enjoy material things, the less one may have to give in the personal exchange of souls, minds, and brains. By machines, man's toil has been eased. He has, theoretically, more time, free time, than before. The trouble seems to be that he has to devote this free time to what the machine produces. Otherwise, the machines might rest. Is it to serve the machines well that he prefers acceleration to leisure, for which he now has time? You see how confused I am by the turbulent relation between man and machines, created by him. Maybe it is their revenge as our hard-working employees to keep us busy when we are lazy.
I don't know why he didn't get along with young people. He's
he did. Of course he did, very much. He had young students from all over the world, and they flocked to get Schnabel's advice and inspiration.
He might have led the Back to Nature movement.
All right, another performance, and this time...
Oh, it's Bruce Hungerford.
Bruce Hungerford, yes, who adores Schnabel. The Sonata Quasi Una Fantasia, first movement, marked Andante, Bruce Hungerford the artist, and will return with the second movement, a scherzo, after this message. Handel will now be heard in the scherzo movement, which is in the key of C minor, Allegro molto e vivace. Now let's hear Schnabel in the scherzo movement from Opus 27, number 1. The great master Schnabel in the C minor movement from the E-flat sonata, the scherzo movement. Schnabel was once asked, "I have never heard you play anything by Debussy or Ravel at your recitals." And Schnabel answered, "As I indicated before, it would be wrong to think that the music which is not represented in my repertoire is not there. In my public activities I cannot play it. It is not liked by me, but I have to limit myself. I hesitate to play Bach in public because the halls for me are too big for this intimate piano music. For instance, the incomparable Well-Tempered Clavier. It should be heard in a room. I have played almost all the works of Schumann very often. Liszt Sonata in B minor. I have played contemporary music, particularly chamber music. But when one gets older, one has to live an intensive life. The extensive life, all winds blowing round our noses, belongs to youth. I have really enjoyed that, and you will hear more of this period in my career. Another part of the book. But I have been asked your last question before. My answer is now that I am attracted only to music which I consider to be better than it can be performed. Therefore I feel, rightly or wrongly, that unless a piece of music presents a problem to me, a never-ending problem, it doesn't interest me too much. For instance, Chopin's etudes are lovely pieces, perfect pieces, but I simply can't spend time on them. I believe I know these pieces, but playing a Mozart sonata, I am not so sure that I do know it inside and out. Therefore, I can spend endless time on it. This can probably only be understood by one who has had the same experience. Many colleagues of mine would laugh at me. They would say, "What is the problem?" I don't see any problem in the sonata. Here we come to the absolutely uninvestigable field of quality, the demarcation line between quality and quantity, essence and appearance. Once I was asked by somebody, "How is it that you speak with such reverence and awe of Mozart's profundity?" It was the wife of a star virtuoso to whom I once spoke in almost deliberately exaggerated terms of the depth of Mozart's music, the unfathomable transcendental qualities. She said, "We too love Mozart, but we think his music is just sweet and lovely and graceful." "If your valuation," she continued, "is the right one, Mr. Schnabel, how do you explain the fact that all children play Mozart so well?" I answered, "Well, children have at least one very important element in common with Mozart, namely purity. They are not yet spoiled and prejudiced and personally involved. But these are, of course, not the reasons why their teachers give them Mozart to play. Children are given Mozart because of the small quantity of notes. Grown-ups avoid Mozart because of the great quality of the notes, which, to be true, is elusive." Schnabel was a great thinker on music, as we are hearing. Grinberg in the slow movement now, or the scherzo movement of the Flat Sonata, Opus 27, number 1. find that again, please, Matt, because
I will.
that performance is unbelievable. I'm flying to Odessa to worship at her altar. Maria Grinberg is an unbelievable artist, and we don't know anything of her in America. She's never been here. She has a wide repertoire. There's another recording in our library of the Schumann Symphonic Etudes, which is fabulous. This is the whole 32 sonatas that she's recorded. She's also recorded the 5 Beethoven concertos on Melodia, and the only place I know where they can be purchased is the Four Continent Book Corporation, I think 18th Street and 5th Avenue. Do you have that yet? Just fantastic. Here's the C minor movement of the Opus 27, number 1. She's a wonder, Maria Grinberg. And now let's hear Wilhelm Kempff in the third movement. Now the third movement starts with around a 43 measure slow introduction, adagio con espressione, and then into the last movement, which is marked allegro vivace, and it's a wonderful, wonderful experiment in form, this whole sonata. Kempff. Wilhelm Kempff in the third and fourth movements of the E-flat Sonata. And we'll hear more performances of these movements and then complete performances tomorrow's program, and certainly the Maria Grinberg will be one of them. And thank you for listening.